everyone. We're so excited to have you. It'll take a little bit of time to get everybody in because we have a pretty big group, but I cannot tell you how excited I am to have this time with Kristen. It's going to be, I think, we named it Real Talk, and it will definitely be Real Talk today. As always, if you've been to a webinar with us before, this is your first time, say hello in the chat where you're from. I know we'll be a pretty international group. And then we will get started. We're really excited. I'm really excited, and so is the whole entire AI for Education team, to be able to talk to one of the real leaders in Gen AI ed tech. And I mean that in a very meaningful way. I think that the work of Khan Academy, especially with the first focus on Khanmigo and trying to figure out what the applications could be to support student learning, have been pretty like cutting edge and on the forefront. I think that what we're going to talk about is that what we thought going in, or what they thought going in, wasn't maybe what we've all learned now a couple years into generative AI. But I have had such a pleasure over the last couple of years of getting to know Dr. Kristen DiCerbo, who is the Chief Learning Officer of Khan Academy. And we were at AI Show a couple months ago, and we're sitting on a bus going to a women and education event, and we just started talking about, I was like, how did this happen and what did you learn? And I was like, would you be willing to talk about that to like a bigger audience? And one of the things that I think is so important this time is to be able to share not just the good, but the learnings. And I think that that's what we try to do all the time, the things that work or don't work. And so I'm just so excited to have Kristen here. We're gonna, as always, like get involved, say hello. Thank you for all, already people are saying hello, and you'll see this from everywhere, from Berlin to Canada to Tampa. I'm in Tampa as well today. You've got, but say hello. We will use the chat for you all to communicate. But if you have a question for Krista or I, please put that in the Q&A. And we'd love to have that conversation. And then if you have a great resource or, a story, maybe Kristen will learn some stuff from you as well if you've used Khanmigo before. But we just want to make sure that this always feels like a community. This is what we really want this to be. So I'm going to come off share, and I'm going to let Kristen introduce herself. And then I'd love, we're going to start with like, how did Khanmigo even come to be? So Kristen, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, first, thanks so much for having me and good to see everyone. I see a couple folks from Phoenix. I live in Phoenix. I'm in Phoenix today. So yay to all of us who are living through the 115-degree heat today. So I'm Kristen. I am the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy, and that title means different things in different places and different types of organizations, but we're a learning organization. And so as the Chief Learning Officer, I am overseeing much of what you see on Khan Academy. So I lead our content, design, product management, community support, and assessment teams at Khan Academy. But my background is in educational psychology. So I have a PhD in educational psychology and initially started as a school psychologist here in Phoenix, and kind of really got excited about what education technology could do and its potential. This is back in like 2002, 2003. And then have spent about the last 20 years designing and building and researching education technology. And so I bring that lens to the work that I do, but also because I've been in this space for quite some time, have learned enough about the technology side to be a little dangerous.
I love a little danger. I mean, like it's, I think I would say that you know a lot more. I mean, I think that, one of the things that really struck me, first of all, your background in educational psychology, I think is so interesting because I think that this is a place maybe we're a little underbaked in right now, like really thinking about what this is going to mean for learning. And so when, one of the things that we actually talk about in our keynote, Kristen, is that there's kind of this dichotomy that happens when ChatGPT was released. So we have a slide that says like ChatGPT 3.5 is released in November 2022. And then in January, New York City, with maybe some of our friends here and where I taught, bans ChatGPT pretty quickly. And then 2 months later, when GPT-4 is released, the next day you release Khanmigo, the math tutor. And so we always think it's such an interesting like way to frame this kind of context of like, we know this is going to have an impact. We don't know what's going to be, but also that Jenny, like that ed tech was thinking this might be a real opportunity. So can you talk to us about like the origins of, you've been thinking about it a while, but I know that we were all really surprised at just how good ChatGPT became from its earlier versions to 3.5. So you can talk about like what happened first and what made you all inspired to actually start building Khanmigo?
Absolutely. So here's the origin story. Just about 3 years ago, it's now, uh, Sal Khan. So Sal's my boss at Khan Academy. Obviously, the name's on the name of the product. Um, got an email from Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, who, as most of you know, are the leaders of OpenAI, and at that time, and they said, "Hey, we've just trained this new model. Would you be interested in seeing it?" And Sal said to me, "Come up, come to this meeting with me, Kristen, and let's see what they're up to." Um, and it turns out in the background that Bill Gates had told them not to go back to him until their new model could pass advanced placement biology. Well, we have a whole lot of advanced placement biology questions that they were interested in using for evaluation and to see how it could do. So we get on this Zoom call with Sam and Greg and Sal and I, and they started showing how it could answer these AP biology questions. And it was doing a pretty good job, not just getting them correct, but explaining the answers and why they were correct or not. And Sal and I were pretty blown away. And they said, "Well, what we'll do is we'll give you access to chat with this new model. Um, Over a Slack channel. So it will hook up to a Slack channel, and then we would ping it and ask it to do things." And so this was just in August of 2023. It turns out what we were playing with was actually GPT-4. 3.5 is already built. They just hadn't put the chat interface on it, which they would do the coming November. So we pretty quickly, like within a couple of hours, said to them, "This is great, but we don't want a tool that's going to answer questions. We want a tool that's going to help students get to the answers themselves. So we're not sure about this." And they said, "Oh, let us teach you how to tell the model how to act." And this was basically our first lesson in prompt engineering. So they just wrote 3 sentences, something like, "You are a Socratic tutor. I am a student. Help me get to the answers. Don't tell me the answer." And just like that, it started obviously with lots of problems and errors and all kinds of things. It started acting more like a tutor. And we said that was kind of our, oh, wow, aha. So from there, there's a couple other big things that kind of moved us forward. So we have a tradition at Khan Academy of hackathons, which is a week where not just engineers, but the entire org works on projects that are we think will, advance Khan Academy in whatever way we want to. Well, we happen to have a hackathon scheduled the third week in September, 3 years ago. And so at the time, we were under this super strict NDA, as you can imagine, with OpenAI. So, like, Sal and I begged them for 30 more people to be included in this NDA and swore like word would not get out, all of that. And so we used this hackathon week to experiment with all kinds of different things we might do with the AI, including being a math tutor, doing, writing coaching, being a teaching assistant in all kinds of ways, writing lesson plans, all of those things we see now, we were kind of playing with as ideas. Um, and so having that whole week of just focusing on what might be gave us then the confidence when we said, okay, what we're going to try to do when they release this GPT-4 in March is with that, we're going to release an AI powered tutor for students and a few activities to help support teachers as well. And then we took our roadmap. So we usually have a roadmap of all the things we think we're going to build in the next 6 months. We took everything we thought we were going to build and threw it away and built Khanmigo over that next 6 months. So that was a crazy time and
My
where we
goodness.
were. But there were lots of things. Those initial first months, there was a pretty legendary now place where it was insisting that 9 plus 5 was 15. And we no it would explain itself and it was trying to explain how it was. And we were like, oh my gosh, how we cannot release this as it is in what we're doing, but worked through a lot of different things even before that initial release in terms of safety and security to try to get to a place where we felt comfortable with the risk we were taking releasing it that early.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think the first thing that really stands out to me is this idea of like, we don't want it to give you answers. We want it to help you. But it kind of still is. I mean, I feel like we haven't really nailed that still. Like, it's still like, I mean, it's almost like, it wants to be like sycophantic. It wants to give you the answer. It wants to help, or in the without anthropomorphizing it too much, but that's how it's been designed. So I think what I'd love to understand, like how you got around that challenge and how well you think it's doing now to do that. But I do think, and I just want to kind of underscore, I don't know if everyone caught this, but like, generative AI models are so fascinating because they are probabilistic engines. And so if you went to ChatGPT right now and you said, and Claude and Gemini and said, pick a number of 1 to 50, it will be 27. This is wild. This is something that we found out pretty recently because it's apparently that's the highest probability answer. So there's some times where you get these correct answers and then, like, so those AP sorry, the AP, answers got right. It looks like it was going to get it right all the time, right? Because that's really hard. But then when you asked it 9 plus 5, and it was determined that was 15, like, what was that? I mean, what was that moment for you all? What did you learn from that moment of, okay, it can do an AP math question correctly and explain it, but it can't do simple calculations,
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we have learned here. So one is, because these are probabilistic, you can't just ask it to do something a couple times and then if it does it right, be satisfied that it's always going to do it. So the first thing we learned was that we have to put in production evaluation tools. So we have, for instance, have created dashboards that monitor math accuracy and tutor behavior in time. And so every morning I can go on and see where's our, how's our math accuracy doing? If there've been changes, is it moving forward? Because we have thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of interactions every day. And a human just can't monitor those. So back then I had no idea that we'd end up spending so much time and effort on understanding how to monitor the output of these tools and to be able to ensure where they are. The other things we've learned is that generative AI is not always the right tool in the toolbox. So for math, we have ended up that when we detect that math is being done, we actually don't ask the AI, the generative large language model, to do the math. We send it out to a Python-based calculator that does the math and then feeds that answer back into the conversation. The student doesn't see any of that, they just see the conversation. But we're having the check on the side so that we're not relying on the model that isn't a calculator and isn't meant to be to do that math, and that we feed it back in. So it's the idea of not potentially asking all of this tool to always do everything, because it's
right?
not meant to do everything all the time.
But I think this is where we get like it gets hard to understand that though, right? And I'm sure at the beginning you were like, "Oh my gosh, it's like, GPT is going to be able to do it all." And then like you're like, "Oh no, can't do math." And we actually have a math guy, Chris, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we did it with SAP, where our math guy was like, don't use generative AI models to support math instruction. Use actual fit for purpose math tools that do what you're talking about, where they go, like Khanmigo's going to the Python calculator, doing the calculations and filtering it back. But I think what can be interesting though is that if you didn't know that about Khanmigo, because you don't see that in the interface, you might just think that, oh, this is a generative tool that it can do math. And I think that this is why these conversations are so important because of the transparency of understanding like what's really happening under the hood. Because I'll give an example. There was a lot of metrics about or benchmarks about generative models being very good at the math olympiad, and it was doing very good, but then when they did the benchmark where it asked them to explain, oh, did we lose Chris?
No, I'm
We're
here.
here.
I'm gonna go off video for just a second.
No
The
worries.
joys of
Parenthood?
working
No,
from
I love
home.
it. Well, so when the math Olympiad, when it was just, generative AI was just asked to give the answers, it was getting very, very high positive rates. But when it was asked to explain these highly complex answers and the computational work that was done, it failed pretty significantly. And so I think that that's why it really gets really, really fascinating for us because we want to know, Kristen, we want to know the real talk of like what's worked or not worked. So I don't know. I mean, do you still have the kiddo in the room?
I'm good. I'm good. I hear you.
Okay, great. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you found in terms of like these really early stage like understandings about what it meant to build a generative model like ChatGPT, and where you think that what you learned that was like very positive, but where you found some challenges.
Yeah, so I think it really is. There's not, I think the specific things of, there's just some things about giving it instructions. So when we first started working on prompts, we were writing all one big prompt. And so we would start like, we were having to do some basic things like write a lesson hook, for example, which you can get pretty well done without a huge prompt. Then we started thinking about building our writing coach, and we wanted it to be able to give feedback on the introduction, feedback on evidence from argument, feedback on tone and style. When you start trying to cram a whole bunch of things into a prompt, the model starts ignoring parts of the prompt, and not ignoring the same parts of the prompt, ignoring different parts of the prompt randomly, as they're as they're happening. So what we found was, oh, now we have to start breaking it apart, the prompt apart, and chaining things and where they work. So that was one big lesson about prompting and how it follows instructions or doesn't follow instructions. Also, over time, the models have changed in their ability to follow instructions. So that steerability, that the makers call, has really changed. Early on, we would be doing things like writing in all capital letters, "Do not give the answer." Sal at one point wrote, "The fate of the world depends on you not giving the answer." And that helped improve the accuracy of it not giving the answer, which is like insane that that was how
Oh,
it was
people are like,
responding.
it's for important for my grandma was one.
Yes, yes,
With the coding, the user has no hands was one, where like you
yes,
have to
yes,
complete the
yes.
code. So if you don't know everybody, like maybe let's take one step back and talk a little bit about the technology. And so I think that people don't know what a system prompt is. And so a system prompt is like when ChatGPT and OpenAI are developing, GPT-5 that's coming out, it will have a natural language written out prompt that gives it directions of like, be polite, give a full answer, don't say I don't know, and these are real. And these change quite a bit and they have to be updated. So if you were part of the sycophantic, what was it, the sycophantic apocalypse where ChatGPT's system prompt was changed and then it just told everybody that you're like the smartest, prettiest human that ever existed until it was fixed, it's really actually very, very impactful. And at the early days, these emotional pleas, these kind of strange, like creative, like ways to try to get the bots to pay attention to the system prompt were really, really common, like Sal's like the
Yes.
fate of the world. And these are still important today, but I think that to the point that Kristen you're saying is that it's become easier to direct, like to at least have normal, not crazy rhetoric to drive
Right.
the bot does, but it can still be radically inconsistent, right? And so have you found like do you all like you're still using ChatGPT, is that correct? You're still using are you using 4.0 or are you starting to do different models now?
We are still in the OpenAI family of models, but we use different ones depending on the different tasks that we're doing. So 4.0, 4.0 mini, depending on different ones respond to different pieces. The reason that we are still with the OpenAI family is because we have a set of evaluations. We've released a data set and a paper along with it. Dan, if you want to post that link in the chat, for folks that are interested in getting into the technical details. But essentially, we run evaluations to see things like how good is each of these different models at telling a student they're right when they're right and wrong when they're wrong for in a tutoring session. Because to your point about them being positive, sometimes we found that the tutor absolutely will say, "Great job," when no, it's not a great job. They're not on the right track at all. So doing just that little piece of tutoring, telling them they're right when
Yes.
they're right and wrong when they're wrong. We released a data set of 180 student conversations that we run through different models and then can rank them. And what we find is that these OpenAI models consistently on the specific tasks we're asking them
What
to
you're doing,
do
yeah.
perform better than the other pieces. and the other models in doing what they're doing. So we are still on that family of models and doing those things. And we don't, I mean, you said they're, radically inconsistent. We don't find that that is the case, that with prompting and with the controls
With
we
the
have,
structures.
that we can get some pretty consistent results. But I think this is a point between that gets lost too, is that folks, when they're talking about generative AI, are sometimes talking about just interacting with ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. But when we're talking about tools that are specifically made for education, the point is not every teacher in the world has to learn all these intricacies of exactly how to prompt. If you're using education tools that have already done some of that for you, but then you need to know how to evaluate those tools, which is an important piece. But I think it's important we think about the differences between the foundational models and education specific tools that are built on those foundational models.
Absolutely. And I think that, my point about the inconsistency is much more on the foundation models. And so just to kind of tease out what we mean by this is that I think a lot of people and maybe not our audience as much, but will are not aware that essentially almost every single generative AI application is run on a set of maybe 5 to 6 families of models like OpenAI. That could be the Google models, that could be Anthropic's models, Mistral, when you have in China and in India, like there are these models, you have the open source models from Meta. And so those foundation models, when you have a Khanmigo or you have a Magic School or you have a Canva AI or a Gamma that does presentations, they're using those models underneath, and sometimes multiple. Sometimes it won't just be a family. It'll be Claude for this, or Sonnet for this, and then it'll be Flash 2.5 for this, for Gemini. And I think that what's really fascinating, though, is that while the foundational model gives you more creativity and openness and control of your destiny, meaning that your prompting technique, what you want, it's pretty unlimited what you can do right now for most educators. It does require a pretty significant amount of AI literacy, which is what we really focus on in AI for Education, to understand how to get to what Kristen and Saul and all the team got through trial and error. But then having something like Conmigo lifts all that work and takes, like it takes it out. But it will have both a lot of positives, I think, right, Kristen? But then maybe it's a little bit more contained and constrained in some cases. And so it's a trade-off, right? It's easier to use and you don't have to build that AI literacy, but you are going to make a trade-off in terms of like how much control or how much you can kind of steer the conversation. So you want to talk a little bit about that kind of distinction?
Yep, that's absolutely right. So for example, when we first launched our lesson planning tool, we, had a very specific lesson plan format, a 5-part lesson plan, which is common in many places, but is not, for instance, what illustrative math uses, or it's
Right.
not what, some districts want folks to use and where that is. So we had done a ton of work on this lesson plan, and Dan, there's a blog post that I have shared a link to about how we literally used a rubric that is used in teacher prep programs for what makes a good lesson plan. And we worked on our lesson plan until it met the proficient status in that rubric consistently before we released this lesson plan. So we were sure this was a good lesson plan. But if you didn't want a 5-part lesson plan, then you had to go elsewhere. Now, we now have 5 different types of lesson plans. We've gradually expanded, but that's just an example of the kind of thing where we have done a lot of work to make it good and responsive and do what we know is educationally right. But to do that, we've had to constrain the system and the parameters a bit around where things are, and it might not be what someone is specifically looking for in what they're doing. So there's definitely some trade-offs there.
Absolutely. And so how have I think that another kind of piece that I think can be hard for us to recognize in an application like Amigo is that some of the same, like the bias that we have. So let's say like, pedagogical bias, so to speak, or like that 5-part lesson plan being the one you chose first, for example, or like bias, like, I mean, I'm just gonna say it, like the grok stuff happening right now if you're not familiar with what's happening, but these tools they are trained on human data and they can be led by human developers. And so right now there's definitely a pretty big case of how biased outputs can be, part and parcel of generative AI responses. But you have bias, you have hallucinations. If you're not familiar with hallucination, that's where the inaccuracies that happen because it's probabilistic. It's always that's that 9 plus 5 equals 15. And so how do you track or measure those in your responses, both in the tutors and the teacher tools? But because I know no one can fix it fully. So how are you thinking about it, measuring it, and mitigating it?
So there's as a tutor, there's some specific things that we know good tutors do, and so we base a lot of that. That's from research on decades of researching human tutors and what that looks like and how those fit. So we are first building on getting the AI to use what do we know from research and how that fits. Then we have this idea of red teaming, which is where you basically have a small group of people who tries to break and get the AI to say things you don't want it to say. We have a moderation system that we use. So our every interaction goes through a moderation API that gives a value on hate, violence, self-harm, sexual content with minors. And if then we set some thresholds for each of those. And you can imagine there's some art and science there, because say for violence, we want to flag conversations about guns. But if you're writing an essay about World War II weapons, then we actually do want you to use guns. So there's some trick in there. But that all of that then sends up a flag. And if students are under 18, that sends an email to their parent or teacher, if they're a school or an individual user, that then flags that conversation and allows the parent to make the judgment of whether that, or the teacher to make a judgment about whether that's a conversation that should be happening or not and where that is. All of those moderations are also reviewed by our community support team every morning, and work through where things are that have gotten through, and then we do a random sample of things of non-flag conversations to see if there's things we're missing and what that looks like. So all of those things are things that we put in place on the monitoring what's happening and what kids are talking to the AI about, and giving visibility and transparency for parents and teachers to what the kids are talking to their AI about and what the AI is saying in return and what that looks like. So all of those things are in place. And then on top of that, in terms of the hallucinations, that's where we have some of the tools like that math accuracy tool, where we are going through all those conversations and having another AI actually grading and scoring and checking for accuracy, and then being able to give us information about whether we're seeing spikes or not in our accuracy and where things go. So there is some machines checking the machines going on here. But before we do that, we basically do human labeling, and then we get to train the AI to get to the levels of agreement with the humans that humans have with each other, and then we then have the AI label conversations.
So do you have any data you're willing to share, even if it's anecdotal or at least in the ballpark of how often kind of those things happen where inaccuracies kind of pop up or these kind of flagged conversations? And has it changed? Has it changed as the technology is as improved and or your approach has?
Yes, and yes. So the one of the things that has become very clear is that it is more accurate when it is grounded in our human generated high quality instructional materials. So we are doing math tutoring, it can happen two ways. You can get tutored on problems that are on Khan Academy. And when you're being tutored on a Khan Academy problem, we feed into, as part of the prompt to the model, we feed in the question, also the answer, and the entire hint structure, which is in procedural math problems is actually a worked example of the problem being completed. And then the answer and the rationales for the right and wrong answer, that all gets fed into then the prompt in the conversation. The other kind of tutoring is a student may bring their own problem in which case we don't have the human generated answer. We still send it out to the calculator, but it's still, we don't have the human's hint structure, the rationales for the right and wrong answers, et cetera. We find a significant difference in the the error rates, it is much more accurate in that place where it's referencing existing content as part of what it's doing in the responses. So that's certainly something we see. Grounding it in good human generated content makes a difference.
Yeah,
Probably not a news flash to anyone, but but not surprising. We also have seen over time the error rates come down significantly just on the model, the foundational models, so that we are seeing
they're
more
improving as
improvement
well.
over time on those.
Do you let people know that, Kristen? Do you let people know that if they're using their own problem set, that the accuracy could be lower? I mean, I would love to know how you do that, but also I think that that is for those of you that are building Gen AI ed tech, I hope that this is something that we could take back or any Gen AI tools, but I'd love to understand how you tell people to be more aware of that difference between the ones that we have enough data to be for a probabilistic model to give you a good answer versus those that are kind of coming in with like a much like less data to give you that answer.
Yeah. So we do it largely outside of the product. So we, for instance, have a series of blog posts around, how we build things and what those look like. So you can find it there. For our school programs, we have individuals who are Khan Academy staff called district success managers who work with our school districts who are our district partners. And they work closely with the school districts on implementation and their implementation plans, and they share all of that information with the schools as they work with them.
Right. I mean, I think that it's probably a place that we could all probably get. It's like a weird thing to give friction to, if you've ever built a technology, you're like low friction, right? You want people just to use it and use it a lot because it means stickiness, it means more data for you all to improve. But the idea of we've talked a lot, and I think Kristen, when we were doing our prep work, of the idea of good friction, that friction that actually creates a space in which you have to stop and think and then like use a tool better. So I think that, those types of things we would love to see more and more be integrated into Gen AI ed tech tools, really just Gen AI tools and, the tiny ChatGPT, this might be inaccurate at the bottom, isn't cutting it, everybody. Like it's just not cutting it. But so for that, so that's on the side of the accuracy and hallucinations. But what about like are students trying to use, Khanmigo not to answer math questions, but to like talk about their boyfriend, or they're using the lesson planning, that lesson, but the writing bot to help them talk about, something that has nothing to do with education. Does that happen, do you see?
Well, the more common thing has been them trying to use other tools to do their math homework.
Yes.
So for a while, we have a chat with historical figures, and they were trying to talk to Pythagoras to get him to do their math homework. So we had to do a whole bunch of prompt hardening, basically like making the prompts so that the Conmigo would be more resistant to answering math problems across the whole site.
Oh, fascinating.
They were trying to write stories where they would get their math homework done. Like the creative
I
effort
mean,
going into getting their math homework done is insane.
the
Uh,
the kiddos that are going to use generative AI to academically dishonest or to cheat, like some of them are incredibly wily,
yes,
and they were doing
yes.
it before. It is really, really, really interesting though, like that how like I thought it was really interesting when we talked, Kristen, on the bus about how like even like so students are using this in kind of ways that are expected, but then like teachers also are like the writing assistant, like what teachers actually wanted the bot to do is also surprising. Can you talk a little bit about the writing tutor you have that was newer, right? It's only a year old, is that correct? Like, and like what you found out from that, because I always think this is so interesting, like user behavior of something that's never happened before is such a fascinating thing for us to learn about.
Yeah, so the writing tutor, writing coach is an interesting journey. So we released initially just a place where students could put in an essay and get feedback on it. And so that was kind of what I was talking about earlier. And we had these different pieces, types of feedback. It would give, here your introduction could grab the user's attention more. Here you introduce evidence, but you don't tie it into your argument, those kinds of things. But we wanted to give a full writing experience support for that. So we created the writing coach where it would start off with your assignment and you could talk to Khanmigo about the assignment itself. You could go through brainstorming topics and brainstorming your ideas, and then to an outline, and then to a draft where you would get that feedback. Interestingly, not a lot, but a good number of teachers told us, you know what? I actually don't want those early stages. I like the feedback they're getting. They get a chance to revise before the teacher, see it. That's great. I don't want to do those early things. And I was like,
Mm,
what? Like, those are really important for writing instruction. And what it comes down to is the teachers wanted those early stages to happen with them
and like
and
that,
in
the
the
human kind of
classroom. And I think this is a big lesson, and I've learned it over and over in ed tech, but sometimes you need to get the same lesson over. If you try to have technology do a thing that the humans view as a key part of their role and responsibilities, then you're going to run into real problems with
yes.
implementation in classrooms, because the humans, the teachers and the students are like, we don't want that. I was at a conference once sitting next to a teacher, and someone was presenting on an engagement detector, like a technology that would flag for teachers when students weren't engaged. And the teacher next to me just kind of mutters like, I have an engagement detector. It's called my eyes.
Yeah, right.
Like,
It's like me. Like I like just being in the
I do that.
classroom. That's the thing
And
that I build.
look across and I see what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of questions about what does the AI do in the classroom? What does the AI not do in the classroom, and what that
And I think
means.
that this is a lesson that I wish we would take on board more is that I don't think we do enough in Gen AI and ed tech in general of like really identifying what the problem actually is. And is for most students, the problem usually isn't brainstorming. It might be outline or it's going to be part of like the bell curve, right? That some kids will need this, but the idea of a writing coach, right, it starts to take away the human judgment component of it, right? And it's a one size fits all. It says you're going to get help at all these stages. And even if that wasn't what you intended to do, it flagged for users very quickly that I'm sure if you had split it up and you are like you have and you said this is the brainstorming part if they're a kid that has trouble with brainstorming and this is the part about this that you would have had less issues because then it could be targeted and it's not a one size fits all approach. And then the work of the classroom, right, gets the kid to where they need to be. And then that becomes the extra layer, the extra step, the movement towards like fluency and capacity and like the ability to actually do the thing. And I think that that becomes really such an interesting part of generative AI because we kind of think that it's an all or one. It's like a zero or one. You either don't use it or use it for everything. And what we've seen for all of the research on the impact so far, it's when people use these tools in meaningful and like directed ways that you see value. And I think that this is a great example of like you thought you were doing this great thing, but then it forces
Right.
us all to kind of understand this moment in time and where we need to like think about the all in versus the spaces in which we extend learning or support individuals. And so I think that's really fascinating. This is why, I mean, I'm sure that you're all enjoying this, but this is why I wanted to have this conversation because I feel like so much we do not talk about the things that we learn. And I think ed tech is we try so hard to be good and look good and to do, but there are almost no Gen AI ed tech tools that have any evidence of learning outcomes of not just learning outcomes, but like there's very little evidence of like a lesson planning tool making more meaningful lesson plans that impact student outcomes. And I know that you all do. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you here is you do a really good job of lifting up the research and the evidence that you have that we'd love to see other organizations do, even if it's like, we don't know. Like, honestly, we don't know. So I just want to, I don't know. I mean, we can talk about why you all, like, why you're comfortable sharing the things that don't work since it's such a rare occurrence.
Yeah. So there's you just put down a whole bunch of
I
things, and
know,
I
sorry.
could
That was
pick
a
up
lot of
any of
things.
them.
Sorry. I'm going, everybody.
um, so so a couple of thoughts. So first is, there's not a lot of reward for sharing what doesn't work from a provider or developer perspective. And so I think, it, basically, if when we share something that doesn't work, what we get is kind of the folks that are really negative about AI, pointing to that as examples and saying, "See, we told you it wouldn't work," as opposed to what we think, like, "Hey, when we found this out about the essay, we went back and iterated and said, okay, now you can choose which parts of the coach you want to use and which parts you don't want to use, and now we're iterating and improving." And so there's that kind of back and forth about whether to share it or not. One thing that we is and another example of this is we have been historically, apart from the AI, have released our efficacy studies. So we do large scale studies, 500,000 students, 600,000 students, about whether working on Khan Academy leads to greater than expected learning gains. And we see that the students who use us for 18 hours a year, so that's about 2 hours a month, about 30 minutes a week, see those gains. And so we, absolutely talk about that. We know practice when you're learning a new skill is so important. That's the learning science. That's where this is. But we know that the majority of students don't get to that level of usage. And we have been transparent in saying in that amongst those 500,000 students, about 5% of them actually get to that number. And again, we get a lot of pushback on, well, see, it doesn't work. Well, the issue is the implementation, the engagement, all of the reasons why it doesn't. But what we do know is practice works. And so
Right.
let's talk about that. And so when we talk about the efficacy of our AI tools, what we're talking about is we're not just inventing a tool for no reason. Our tutor is made and designed to work with that practice system. So students are getting more support during that practice. They're getting better feedback during that practice. So by improving the practice that we already know works and helping students get more practice because they're getting that support and work, that's our hypothesis for why we think the AI will improve learning. So first, I think it's important when you're thinking about all of these AI tools, what is the hypothesis? What's the theory of
Yes.
action for
What is the
why we
evidence
think this will
base?
work? Yeah.
Yes.
And so, we're building on all of that existing evidence to build this tool, not just inventing something out of whole cloth.
I mean, I think that this is I find this to be really interesting just in general. So if you aren't familiar with my background, like I was the CEO of an ed tech in Australia before I started AI for Education. And it was my first time really building technology for schools. And I always found it to be so interesting, even then, of this lack of like just talking about what works or doesn't work. We actually launched a well-being tool where it was well-being for learning. And I it was great for me because I got to do all the coaching calls. So every 41 schools of different types, I got to coach on their data on students' well-being and readiness to learn. And then what we did is we published what we learned alongside the tool. And that was like, you know what? There's some good things, other things we don't know. Like here's some things. And you know what? It was really well received. And it was one thing where, yes, I think that maybe right now it's very fraught with AI because there are, like, for example, the cognitive debt study that was done by MIT that said if you offload your thinking to an AI, you have very little cognitive work and you don't have a lot of ownership. Everyone was like, "Oh, AI will rot your brain." But the same thing would happen if I asked Kristen to do my paper or my parent
Exactly.
or an essay mill. And then, but what people don't see, first of all, it's a very small study that when the students wrote the outlines and then used AI to help them write it, their cognitive load was quite high, their ownership was high, and those losses were actually regained. And I think that this is where it is so important for us to have a nuanced conversation. There is not an organization in the world, no matter McDonald's to the smallest district in school from whatever part of the world that has this figured out, including Khan Academies or OpenAI. And if we can't have these really honest conversations, then we're going to be in a pretty difficult position because we're going to trust these tools to do things that A, humans want to continue to do, like kids want to continue to do, or teachers, or B, that could actually be negatively impactful. So I just want to really say thank you, Kristen, for your willingness and Khan Academies. You if you watch our stuff, we don't often have organizations that we work with in this way because we want to be tech agnostic. We want to be a player that allows. But I do think that when there is a good example of transparency, evidence bases, and willingness to share, it's really important to support. So anyway, that's a very long piece, but I we have a couple of questions, Kristen, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And then we'll let everybody go. Like, and so I think that, and a couple of questions are pretty technical, but I think I might focus on kind of the bigger ones. Like, where, like, when you thought about the evidence base for, let's just pick the math tutor because that's definitely the one that's most baked. Like, what evidence base did you use? What was the theory of action? And then did you have to change it, right? And I think that that would be really interesting for people to know.
Yeah. So I will walk you through our simplified theory of action first, and I'll tell you that because then each piece has the evidence base. So the idea is access to Khanmigo leads to high quality tutoring interactions, leads to increased cognitive engagement, leads to increased what we call skills to proficient. So on Khan Academy, you move from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered as you move through things. And we know if you get more skills to proficient, you will see greater gains on external assessments. So that's the basic piece. So then so if you take that, the first piece is high quality tutoring interactions. All right, what does that look like? So what does the evidence base look like? That's where we built on all of that understanding of what human tutors do. And there's literally research about specific moves. So when do you pump for more information? When does the tutor summarize? When does the tutor lead into a new path, solution path? When do they not? Well, how much support do they provide? All of that is there's research about that we then attempted to make Khanmigo follow. Still a work in progress because the trick there is that different students need different of those moves at different times.
Yes.
So we're working on that. But so that's the research it's built on. And then we said, how do we evaluate whether it's doing those moves well? And that's the piece that I was talking about actually labeling all of those transcripts. And is it doing the summarizing? Is it doing the probing for more information? Is it doing procedural correction? Like all of those things. So that's the first step. Because if it's not giving a high quality tutoring interaction, there's no
Yes.
reason to think that it's going to lead to learning. The
Right.
next step is that cognitive engagement. So our students, we know there's a researcher named Mickey Chi, actually at Arizona State University, and she and her partner in the research, Ruth Wiley, put out what they call an ICAP framework, ICAP. And that stands, if you do that backwards, as you move from passive to active to constructive to interactive learning, the learning increases. And to be clear, constructive doesn't mean constructivism. It means the students actually engaging and constructing meaning in the answer. So we said, how do we ensure that students are having those kinds of interactions that are leading to that? And so that's the research base we used on the cognitive engagement. And then we started thinking and looking again at those transcripts to see if we could find evidence of those different levels. And this is another place where we're being pretty clear. We certainly see some amazing interactions, like where I would like to hold it up and be like, this is what we can get to. And we see a lot of IDK, IDK. My favorite this week was bro, IDK.
Or
Like,
bra, it should just be bra.
bruh. um, so again, if students aren't engaging with the tutor, we're not going to get learning outcomes. So that's again part of our theory of action. We're now continuing and thinking about how do we continue to build those better interactions and what they look like. So that laying out that theory of action then points us to both the evidence base to build on and then our evaluation
What it
strategy.
is. Well, I think I'm just gonna. Someone asked about the attitudes. I think that just to maybe like TLDR it a little bit is like that kids can do self-directed learning or can have resilience or will continue through, interactions and even ones that are incorrect with a bot like Khanmigo, because it's not going to have the human component, they're going to be probably your best use case right now. And we've heard this a couple of times, Kristen, like a kid that's really like, they just really need the extra support, but they can sit and engage and construct like that. This is a great opportunity because a lot of the time they may not have access to a tutor at home or they might not have access to additional support. But you're talking about the group of the kids that are maybe already disengaged or maybe don't find value in a bot interaction, which you know what is okay because I mean like it's weird and sometimes fails and can be strange, and like that's just how we are right now. But I do think that if you're thinking about ways in which some scaffolding could help, that would be the teacher helping the young person move through the bot interaction to model best use cases. Like there, you could start to bring in the people side of what we can do, and that this again, there's no one size fits all. But if you can choose those kids that maybe that's 25% that are in a really good spot in terms of their ability to really engage, right? With a bot like this, that frees you up potentially to build those skill sets more directly with the students that they're not quite ready. It's not their preferred way. They have some other initial needs. So I think that's a really fascinating component. We have two
There's
other
a, and
yeah, sorry,
I have one
do it.
story I want to tell you. So there's a teacher in Newark, New Jersey, actually, a science teacher, and she felt like her kids weren't asking good questions for Khanmigo, and they just didn't know like what are good questions in a science class to ask. So first they took Khanmigo and asked Khanmigo what good science questions are. So they sourced a whole bunch of questions. They picked their favorite top five like question stems that would be good more generically. She then made them printed out 3x5 cards that they have on their desks with
Yes, yeah, that's
questions. And I just love the juxtaposition of this like old school paper
the
printed
best
out
technology and then the
thing.
post-it.
Right.
If that is not an anecdote for education writ large, there isn't one like, like the sentence starter that like, it's just on your desk. If you struggle,
Yes.
that's hysterical. I love that. And you know what? It's real. Like there's no, we were actually talking, one of our instruction assessment course just started today, Kristen. And I was talking like, how much time do we have paper that just like, we never look at again, like those Post-its with computer vision. It's like the silly, like it's kind of a silly use case, but take an image of the photo of the Post-its and get feedback. And like, it's such a funny, like the world of like, it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both, I think is the
Both.
best
Yeah.
approach. Okay, I have one tactical question from the group because we have a very international crowd. They would like to know when you're expanding Khanmigo into other places across Europe and potentially the world. So that's I'm sure you don't have a great answer for that right now, but if you might.
Yes. No, so our teacher tools are free for teachers in about 40 countries. The reason we are able to do that is because these AI interactions cost money.
Yes.
We are grateful for a partnership with Microsoft where Microsoft has covered the cost of those interactions with our teacher tools. So we don't have the bill every month of
Yeah.
teachers from 40 countries working through that. So as the other option is of course that we charge for Conmigo and we do that in the US. The issue is we're a nonprofit and we've never charged for anything.
Yes,
So
right.
we don't have entities set up in all those countries to collect tax money and to pay the taxes and collect it all and work through it all. And we have a very small finance and legal team that makes sure we're meeting all of the legal requirements for AI in every country we want to go into. So I apologize that it's taking so long for the student version of this to be able to be out in other countries. But it literally is like we have to charge for it to be able to not
To
make,
afford it.
we
Yeah.
don't
People
want
don't
AI
realize.
bankrupts Khan Academy to be the headline.
Yeah, we talked about those foundation models. Every single time a kid responds, there's going to be an actual cost, which is very different than other technologies. Like if you're using a tutor that was like hosted like on an application that wasn't generative AI, you would have to pay like hosting fees and they could be higher based on how many people, but this is different because it's a volume thing. Every single time you hit, go, there's a cost, it's an environmental cost, there's a actual costs. And so I think that that is something of why there was a question about why the student version is because it's going to be a lot of high touch. Like the tools themselves are affordable-ish because they're structured and there's very little like massive like 95 prompts. It's like all structured, but with the student interaction, it can be quite intensive in the amount of compute and API calls. So that's something to consider. And that's why a lot of tools right now are asking you to pay very early, even if they don't have good evidence, because it would be too expensive for them to run like traditional models or traditional applications. So something to consider. Okay, last question, and we're going to end here. And I'm so excited because I get to see Kristen in a couple weeks in Arizona about a big piece that we're not going to announce yet, but we're going to do a pretty amazing, approach of like thinking through what GenAI is going to really mean for education as we move forward. But there was a question like I want to ask you because we always like balance. What are you most optimistic about in terms of GenAI and education? and then maybe what you're most concerned about, and maybe start with the concern first so we can end with the positive.
That sounds like a good strategy. um, I think the thing that keeps me up at night, I'll say, is just that it's almost impossible to know where this is going.
Mm,
And so 3 years ago, would I ever have predicted that we'd be in this place now with where things are? No, I had no idea that it would like be this roller coaster that we're on. And so the same holds true for what's in the next 5 years. A lot of times people will ask me, like, what do you think's gonna, what's your vision for the next 5 years? And it's so difficult to know. And that makes it really hard in a place like education where we do not move quickly. And for good reason, because we don't want our education system to be swaying with the fads of the time. But it also makes it really difficult to plan ahead and figure out what's coming in the future. And I certainly think that that's what worries me. And I think, oh gosh, where are we going to end up here? And is it going to be the better version that we are working towards, or is it going to be the dystopia where kids have offloaded their entire cognitive engagement to these tools, and we haven't found a way around it? So that certainly is my concern. I think what I'm optimistic about is actually the short term, and I think that the ability to bring in more of the visual work so that the AI and the student and the vision can all work together, whether you're drawing something or working on a math problem, that we get to the point where it's not just the text back and forth, but that it's a voice interaction, almost like with a tutor, and it can see the things that students are acting on. I think the engagement piece of that has the potential to be much more like students naturally do their work,
right.
instead of having to use, that all the
Yeah,
keyboard calculator and all that. So I think
exactly.
that has a lot of potential, and we're not that far from it.
I agree, and I think that also, like, one of the things that's funny about a chatbot is, like, most kids don't wanna answer 100 questions. Like,
Right.
they just don't. They want you to help them, and they want to so to be able to actually get real-time feedback that's more directed like a teacher would do, I think is I totally agree. But, I think that I just wanna say thank you. First of all, everyone, thanks for hanging out and asking great questions and being engaged. I think
I'm
that
sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. I
I know we
saw
didn't get to all of
some
them,
good
but you
ones
know
coming
what?
by, but here we are.
Maybe like the next big epoch and the thing, we can have another conversation. But I just want to say thank you to Kristen as well. I mean, I think that I've already said it, but the thing we need now is honesty, transparency, and evidence. And like if we can't do that, then we were doing a disservice to our young people and our teachers and our families. And so if you're watching this and you are making decisions about buy tools that will be willing to share evidence and talk about transparency about what they're doing and how. And then also make sure to give space for real understanding of the impact on young people. So thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Kristen. We appreciate it. We'll send the recording tomorrow, and I hope everyone has a great morning, night, day. I mean, everyone's in different places. We just appreciate you for joining and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.